How do you define a difficult conversation? Like what makes a conversation more difficult, or less difficult?
Oh gosh, what doesn't make a conversation difficult? I mean, I'll be curious about your answer, by the way, about what makes conversations difficult for you. For me, sometimes it's that there's a lot of uncertainty involved. So I feel like we don't have great information. We're trying to make a judgment call, and maybe we have very different information, and so we have different instincts about the way to go. It could be that there's a lot of history in the relationship, right? So this is just the latest example of each of us feeling frustrated or badly treated by the other, and we're bringing all of that we're carrying in the door with us. Sometimes it's that I don't know what I want or what I think, right? So some of the hardest conversations are the conversations I have with myself about trade-offs and where I feel like, okay, I have to make a hard decision. What can I live with, and how does that intersect with identity and the story I tell about the person I want to be? Because those are often in conflict. I think we can be really simplistic about identity, and some of the hardest conversations are places where your own identity is in conflict. Like, I want to be a good parent. I also want to be responsive to clients. I'm now with my kid and my phone is ringing. Do I take the call? That's a simple moment where my identities are in conflict with each other, and often difficult conversations for me are places where, gosh, I could tell two stories about who I want to be, and they each take me in a slightly different direction. What about for you? What's hard for you?
So I've been thinking about this. It's probably a couple things. One is, it is being very clear on what I want, right? Sometimes I ask myself before I go into a room, and have the type of conversation is, am I bringing my frustrations with me, and how relevant is this to what we're going to be discussing? Is it to vent, or is it to drive, behavioral change? And then I think the other challenge is, if, speaking in front of a room of people, for example, how does that message land uniquely with each person, right? So there might be things that resonate more strongly with some than others. And when you have different interpretations and different personality styles and so on, like, how do you make sure that that message is landing? So I think those are probably the two biggest challenges.
Yeah, and you're reminding me that it's true that often in leadership, right, you've got people lobbying for one direction or another, and you're going to disappoint someone or frustrate someone who very genuinely believes that you are wrong and nuts for this decision.
Always.
And maybe a bad person also, just to throw in an extra little more juicy bit.
It's interesting. We did a podcast on this. It's like it's the nature of leadership, right? It's that you're trying to make decisions that aren't always going to be 100% popular with everybody or agreeable to everyone, but you're ultimately trying to do what you believe is best for the organization, and there's obviously going to be different schools of thought on that. Now, I know you mentioned that the identity conversation is one. The other two was like the blame and the feelings. And I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs experience the blame or the what happened conversation.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So the basic idea for anybody not familiar with the book is that all difficult conversations really have the same underlying structure. And that if you look at people's internal voices, the things that we're wrestling with, thinking about, feeling, trying to decide what to do about in these messy conversations, you can really bucket them into three conversations that we're having with ourselves and with each other. And the first is what you just named, which is the what happened conversation. And this is our story about what has happened, what we think is happening now, and what we think should happen. And that actually itself, that story has three pieces. One is, what is this really about, and what am I right about? Which is the place we feel like, what I feel certain I'm right about is a place I'm tempted to cling because it feels the safest, but it's actually a trap because then I'm not curious about what I might be missing. The second part of that story about what happened is blame. Whose fault is it that we're having this problem? And the third is all about intentions and motivations. Why are they acting this way? Why are they being so stupid or annoying or irresponsible? But sitting underneath that story that we have about what happened is what we call the feelings conversation, which is how we each feel treated by the other. And we're each trying to figure out how to manage our own feelings or respond to the other person's feelings if they yell or cry or are bitterly disappointed in us. And finally, the last piece is that sitting under all of that, at the heart of it is the identity conversation, which is the story we tell about who we are or want to be. And often if a conversation feels difficult, it's because something around identity has gotten hooked, and that generates bigger feelings and anxiety than normal. And then that colors the story we're telling about what happened. So they're all linked together.
It's like you consider yourself a nice person, right? Until you have to do something confrontational.
Totally. I mean, a really easy way to hone in on this is like when you're in a public place and someone is doing something irritating, like they're talking behind you in the movie, do you say something? And some people will be like, definitely not. I'll just be really, really mad and fume. But I'm not the kind of person who causes a problem or is annoying, or is it, unfortunately, what is referred to these days as a Karen. Totally unfair to all the Karens in the world who have their own identity issues that we're foisting upon them. And then other people will say, oh, I absolutely would say something because I would want someone to say something to me. And I'm the kind of person who's very direct, right? And forthright. And I'm just being thoughtful. And the only difference between those two is the story we're telling about who we are in doing what we're doing and making the choice that we made.